Hello everyone. So I want to show to you basically what is the foundations of what I've been discovering about the connections between Ireland, the Bible, the Daoist painting of the Neijing Tu as a metaphysical map of the human body, and how when we overlay them all together like a hologram of an archetypal pattern, we're going to be able to have this really amazing tool for inner ascension, raising of the sacred secretion, the IESA crest within. And so how did it all start? You know, if you've seen my other work, you will have heard that, you know, I went around Ireland in 2016, which is about 7.5 years ago now. And when I got back, I overlaid the map of Ireland next to the map of the Neijing Tu, and I realized that they were the same. 7 years on, I decided spontaneously one day to test out my theory as a meditation within my own body. And this was in January 2022, last year. And so in that meditation, I literally overlaid the map of Ireland into my body, knowing that the locations of the cities and the lakes and the rivers and the mountains and the streams of Ireland actually matched up to my human anatomy internally. And then I overlaid the map of the Daoist painting of the inner weaving, the inner alchemical, metaphysical map of the sacred secretion, and I overlaid that on top of the map of Ireland, on top of my own human body. And I used all three in unison to move the sacred secretion through the microcosmic orbit through my body. Sounds complicated? It's not really, it's just a bit detailed. So I want to take you through the details for the reason that my theory is this, because I've quoted in my book Rudolph Steiner, right? And he wrote a book called The Electric Doppelganger. And in that book, he basically stated that when God created the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Paradise, he mirrored it and he put it aside. He kept the original copy pure, the blueprint. And then when the Luciferian energies invaded the Garden of Eden, they actually invaded the mirror copy, and that's where we all live right now. And so according to Steiner, Ireland is the original preserved blueprint of the Garden of Eden. And so when I started thinking about that as an actual, of course hard to prove, but you know, take it as a potential fact, what if we wanted to get back to the original blueprint of the Garden of Eden, and we have already the map of it as the Neijing Tu, as the Daoist depiction, which matches up perfectly with the map of Ireland and the human body. And if we overlaid all of these things into our own body, could we then, through biofeedback, align and harmonize through resonance the original Garden of Eden blueprint into our own human body, while then feeding it back through the hologram to the original Garden of Eden and creating a biofeedback loop? That's the basics. So anyway, enough with that. Let's get drawing. So what you'll see here is a human body facing west, and I'm going to go through and just take you on a little magical mystery tour of the organs of the human body, because not everyone has done anatomy and physiology. And so if we start down here, now let's start with the spine. So you can see that this bit of the spine here, it's a lot bigger than this bit. And there's also a bit we can't really see on this diagram that goes up into here. And so from lower to middle to upper, the vertebrae of the spine get smaller and smaller. And then down here, that's where we've got the tailbone or the coccyx. So from the coccyx to the sacrum, this is the lower part of the spine, and this is where the lumbar plugs in. and this is divided into 5. And at lumbar 2, we generally have the position of the kidneys. So this is the kidneys here. And then coming up into this thoracic spine, we have all of the ribs coming out. And what do the ribs do? They protect all of these internal organs in a cage. And so we'll get to the internal organs on the other side as we go around, but the kidneys are on this side because they're really the most posteriorly located organ. So then coming up to the neck, this is called the cervical spine, and this is where the spine actually goes into the brain and the brainstem. So then here obviously we've got the grey matter of the brain. It's called the cerebrum, and actually down here there's another little grey matter. It's called the little brain, and it's called the cerebellum. And that part of the brain specifically has the most magnetite in the entire body, the most highly magnetic substance in the periodic table of elements, which is very interesting when we get into the raising of the Christ, the Jesus Christ within, because that place in the back of the neck where the brainstem is with the magnetite is capable of producing a very amplified electromagnetic energy. So then coming around to the front, obviously this is the eyes, the eyeball, and then we have the nose and the mouth, and then coming down through here we've got the throat, and in the throat we've got the esophagus and the larynx and trachea. So basically one's for food and one is for air. The food one, the esophagus, goes straight down into the stomach. And then the air pipe, larynx trachea, that goes into the lungs. So it's a little bit hard to see here, but I'm going to call the lungs this region here, because behind that we've got the heart. And you can see this red aorta. So red one means arteries. Blue one means veins. So this is oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood running through the ventricles of the heart. So you can see here that kind of on a diagonal opposite, the kidneys and the stomach share the solar plex. And so that's a big nerve complex that feeds the organs at that region. And, you know, noting also that out of all of the spinal vertebra, nerves come out. So the upper nerves and the cervical are feeding up into the head and the face and the brain. And the ones in the middle in the thoracic region are feeding into these organs located nearby. And then as we go down to the lumbar and the sacrum, these are feeding the lower organs and also down into the legs. These ones are going to the arms. So it's kind of just a circuitry system in a way. And all of the nerves, they're just plugging into the organs, and this is how we charge up our organs with electrical energy when we move our body. And so coming further down, you're going to see this little greenish looking thing here. And we can call that essentially it's looking like it's the part of the large intestine which is coming and finishing down here. And then this squiggly looking one, that's the small intestine. So small intestine connects to the stomach. The stomach absorbs and assimilates nutrients from the food we eat. It goes into, it works with the spleen, pancreas to start making blood supply for the body, which gets also produced in unison with the heart, oxygenated through the air we breathe, and then pumped all around the body as red blood cells, using iron as the carrier for oxygen. And so whatever the stomach and spleen and pancreas and liver and gallbladder didn't use, they pass that onto the small intestine that kind of sorts out the waste from the useful, and then whatever is still useful, it then starts putting it back into the bloodstream via the membrane of the small intestine, which kind of seeps it back out of that organ. And everything that is not used, it gets recycled, it gets cycled through, and then it links into the bottom of the large intestine, which goes up the ascending, across the transverse, down the descending, and then ends up being formed into stool as a waste product that gets excreted out of the body. So that's the digestive system. And then lower down, you know, this region here, this is the bladder in the front, and then behind the bladder is the reproductive organs, which is, you know, hard to see on this drawing because it's from the side anyway. There's the thing with anatomy, like you look at it from the side, the front, from the top down, from the bottom up, you know, there's all these, or if, you know, in this case you've kind of sliced the whole body in half on that sagittal plane to peer inside. There's lots and lots of different perspectives that we can take when we're understanding the anatomy. So then, as the next layer, we can literally superimpose the Daoist painting of the Neijing Tu, the metaphysical map of the human body. And if we superimpose it over the top of this actual human, we're going to see that it's got some very interesting matchups, because that's what it's designed for. It is actually the human body in profile. So if we inspect the regions in the same order, in the region of the kidneys, we've actually got this fire. And if we look on the diagram to the left, the colourful one, we're going to see that is opposite a lady called the Maiden at the Wheel. And she is actually representing the stomach. So we're just going to call this fire, and we're going to call this one Maiden at the Wheel. So coming up on the Daoist map, you'll see just above the fire, it's pretty hard to see, there's a little tiny gate. And this is basically at the level of the heart. So I'm going to call it the heart gate. It's actually gate number 2. We'll get to gate number 1. And then coming up the Neijing Tu further, we're following this river, right? So the river actually goes, we'll make the fire a bit more internal. The river actually goes up through the fire and up through this gate, and then it goes up through here, and it gets right up into there, going into the brainstem, where it meets another tiny, tiny gate. And so that I'm going to call brain stem gate, and that's gate 3. And that gate 3 in the painting is actually adjacent to a red dot, and that red dot is actually representing the sun, which symbolizes the dew, or the masculine polarity meridian in terms of electromagnetics. Then as we go up further in the Neijing 2, you'll notice that there's all these mountains, right? Like this. And there's a little tiny dot here. So we've got this sun dot, and this dot here, it's actually representing the heavens above. And just in here, there's a little pyramid without the top, and this is the Bai Hui acupuncture point. And this is also relating to Meru, and it's called Niwan Palace, and it's also called Nirvana. All of those names. So coming down further, you'll notice around the region of the eyes, there's this Maitreya Buddha. So it's a little man sitting in lotus, kind of forming a pyramid. And just under him, in the sort of region of the open mouth, there is a yellow dot. I don't have a yellow marker pen, so now it's blue, and that is actually representing the moon, the Ren meridian, which is the feminine, and that's the negative polarity. So when we do the microcosmic orbit, we're going up the Ren, down the dew, and then at a certain point that needs to be reversed. So in this region, if we refer to the Neijing 2, we're going to see this opening. And so you can imagine if this person here had an open mouth, and then the nose would be kind of like that. Open mouth, and then the chin's going a little bit like that. So I'm just going to draw the open mouth opening like that. There's the border of the nose. And then just in that lower portion of the open mouth, we've got this little dude in robes with his hands up to the heavens, and he's got this square looking pool divided in two beside him. And that square looking pool with the spring flowing out of it, that is actually representing the upper and lower palate of the mouth. That's the upper bit, upper roof of the mouth, and the lower, and the lower, obviously, that's where the tongue joins to the root, and in the microcosmic orbit, that is where we put the tongue up to touch from the lower to the upper, and that closes the circuit, joining the positive and negative polarity in the upper region of the body. So coming back to the Neijing 2, we see beyond this pool of water representing the upper and lower palate, which is also the Red Sea that Moses parted, and this is Moses right here, we can see that there is what is called a 12-storied pagoda, and that is representing the throat, the trachea, larynx and esophagus, and also the cartilage, the protective cartilage surrounding that, those two pipes, food pipe, air pipe. And so as the energy comes down, you'll notice in the Neijing 2, there's this little character sitting on this, standing on this spiral, and it looks like a big whoosh of white waves, which really should be symbolizing air, because it's the lung energy and the heart energy together. And his name is the cow herd boy. So he is representing the heart, and he is holding the big dipper, or little dipper, I can't remember which one, Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, and over the course of 1 year, as I've said in other videos, that shows us the svastika, which shows us the 4 seasons, the agricultural cycle. So he's in the region of the heart and the lungs. And then we've already talked about the maiden at the wheel. She's this woman weaving this red thread. So, you know, she's in the stomach. What does the stomach do? It produces blood from the food we eat. And some of that blood actually travels up through, you know, it mixes in with the heart and the stomach producing blood together. And then what's going on in this diagram of the Neijing 2, it's actually weaving right up into and around the brain. And what do we know about the most highly vascularized organ in the brain? It lives just behind the ventricular system, and it's called the pineal gland. So this red ribbon that the maiden at the wheel is weaving is actually speaking about the vascularization of the pineal gland in the brain. And we can also, if we just refer back up to the brain again, we've got this lake region, and that's, as I've described in other videos, representing the ventricular system. So we've got the ventricles and pineal, plus of course all the other parts of the brain. But you know, obviously on this diagram we can't see inside there. That's one for another day. We're doing basics. And so then, referring back to the Neijing 2, you can see that there's this outcropping next to, on the left side of the maiden at the wheel is a pointy little island peninsula, and it's got trees on it. So that is basically, if he's the heart, she's the, you know, the stomach and the spleen, and then those trees represent the liver and the gallbladder. Their Chinese 5 element is actually wood, so wood trees. And then coming down, you'll see, you know, under this main fire, there's these 1, 2, 3, 4 linked together Tai Chi symbols. And they've got all this bright light coming out of them. So, you know, 1, 2, I'm just going to enlarge it. 1, 2, 3, 4, like this. So then we've got this representation of cell division from the 2 to the 4 to the 8. And this is also because the, you know, the Tai Chi has this yin and yang side. We also have this connecting to the sun and the moon and this yin and yang polarity in the sacral region of the spine. And so under that sacral region, we've got a smaller fire, and it's connecting into all of this lower region, which is the biggest watery area in the artwork. And then obviously that runs up through the fire, through the bigger fire, and all the way up into the brain, ventricular system, and flowing around the brain, hydrating and protecting. So then adjacent to that sacral plexus there, we've got a little man with an ox, and this is representing the intestines. The ox ploughing and preparing the earth for the new season. It's all about planting crops, growth, harvest, digestion, eating, everything like that. And then in the bottom there, in this region here, we've got 2, little people. There's a boy one and a girl one, and they're the twins, and they're the reproductive organs. There's a boy for the testicles and a girl for the ovaries. And so what they are doing at their water wheel is they're actually encouraging the waters from below to move up through that first fire, pass through the sacral plexus, up through the larger fire, which is the kidneys, through that solar plexus, up through this gate here and this gate up here. And so what is the remaining part down here? There's actually a big gate. And that's the first gate, and that's actually the coccyx. Oh, I spelled that wrong. And the tailbone. So this is the first gate. This is the second gate, and this is the third gate. So when we're doing the raising of the sacred secretion, which is moving energies through this waterway, which is the cerebral spinal fluid, we actually have to pass through these 3 gates. Why are they called gates? But it's because of the anatomical construction, the structures. So the coccyx is a very small little structure, and inside there that we have the filium terminale, which is the smallest, narrowest portion of the spinal cord where the cerebral spinal fluid flows. So it's a very difficult, tiny little gap to squeeze things through. And then as we get up to this region at gate 2, you can see that the incline of the spine is actually having to work a lot harder, because it's not only going straight up, it's going against gravity in a sense. And then same thing for the tailbone up at the brainstem, gate 3, again another tiny little gap to squeeze high pressured water through, which is called the aqueduct of Sylvius, which is the 4th ventricle. So that is the path of the Ren and the Du, the river chariot, forming the microcosmic orbit, as we can see it represented in the Neijing 2. Obviously there's a lot more detail to this, but I'm just wanting to show for this presentation the nature of the way things are getting matched up as the hologram.